People, they do not hate meetings. What they hate is wasting time. And so many meetings are a waste of time. You can't measure the effectiveness of a meeting if you're not clear what you're doing. And so that's the first place to start. You shouldn't be allowed to have a meeting if you're not clear why and what you're doing.
Welcome to KPI Fireside. Our mission is simple: to improve companies and to improve careers through continuous improvement. In every episode, we explore the spark, the moment, the mindset, or the method that ignites real change. Whether you're just starting out or leveling up, you'll find the insights and inspiration to fuel your next improvement. Welcome back to KPI Fireside, a continuous improvement podcast. I am your host, Keith Norris. Our guest today is Evan Unger. Evan has more than 30 years of experience leading organizational change as both a healthcare and pharmaceutical executive and a global consultant. He's held senior leadership roles at Merck and Centura Health and has trained thousands of leaders in collaborative leadership, change management, and high-impact facilitation. Evan, welcome to the podcast.
Thank you for having me, Keith. It's a pleasure to be here.
Wonderful, wonderful. So as we get started here, I'm curious just to have folks get to know you a little bit. Tell us just a little bit about some of your history and your career, and start with there's something that you consider yourself an expert in. Tell me what that would be.
Well, two things, Keith. One thing is culture change. Well, that's what we did as consultants. And as part of that, we always were training the change agents in an organization in a style of leadership we call collaborative leadership, but at its essence, it's process facilitation, how to facilitate Kaizen events where you are leading a group of senior people and trying to get them to design things, plan things, make decisions. So high stakes workshop type meetings and retreats.
Wonderful, wonderful. Well, this will be a fun conversation. You mentioned a word that's one of my favorites there, and you said culture. So I want to start out by just asking you to define what is culture.
Well, culture there's sort of implicit culture and explicit culture. So the explicit culture is the values that organizations espouse, the norms for how they interact. But then underneath that, maybe is the more implicit culture, which is how the organization really functions. The, if you will, informal networks, how the politics work. And so a culture really is the set of behavioral things for how an organization goes about pursuing continuous improvement or pursuing its strategy. So it really are those types of things.
And it sounds like you've kind of zeroed in on this meeting facilitation, which resonates with me as a leader, because when you're leading as a leader, like the place where you go to do your work a lot of times is in these meetings, it seems. Is that what would you describe that as kind of like the place where the work gets done as a leader is oftentimes in meeting with others?
Yeah, I've asked clients, and I've done this for 33 years, two questions. The first question is always is, how many meetings are going to take place in your organization today? Right, and that's going to depend on the size of an organization, right? You worked at Franklin Covey, it has about 1,000 people. I started my career at Merck, we had 75,000 people, so the number is going to be different. Now, I've asked the second question to organizations, what's the average effectiveness of a typical meeting that you attend? 0 to 100%. I probably asked that question 6,000 times in 33 years. I've never had someone say 80%, more than 80. I usually get 50, 40, 30%. And I sit here with clients and I say, let's do a little math together. Okay. If I ask someone at Merck how many meetings are going to take place today, they're going to say 200,000 in a single day. Right. I say, if you do the math, I want you to think about it, because senior executives spend at least 50% of their time in meetings. And when you add it all up, if you're only spending 50% of your time in meetings and you're working 8-hour days only, you're going to spend a year's worth of your life in meetings in under 9 years. So meetings are where our leadership manifests, right? It's where people engage us. If we're doing analytics on our computer, right, no one sees that. But when I take people's time, that's where my leadership manifests, and that's where opinions of me are made. And if I'm running 50% effective meetings, people see me as a bad leader.
So Evan, I want to get to know you just a little bit. I mean, obviously you're passionate about this. You spent a lot of time doing this. Tell us a little bit about. I like to ask the question: what was the spark? How did you get inspired, excited about this as the thing you wanted to spend your career doing?
Well, I mean, let me go back. I go back a ways, right? So I got out of business school in 1989, went and worked for Merck, huge global pharmaceutical company. They had a rotational assignment for MBAs, like what I was doing. And then they just made up this job called the Director of Change Leadership and Development, which, in all honesty, was a fancy title for I had no idea what I was doing. I'm like 3 years out of business school. There's a new CEO comes on board. He does his assessment, as CEOs would do, and he's not happy because the organization just siloed, bureaucratic, people aren't collaborating. And I'm on this major procurement reengineering project. Honestly, I have no idea what I'm doing. And it rolls down to me to get people to start collaborating. Now I'm like, you know, I'm 3 years out of business school. I did what any young enterprising person did. I hired an outside consultant. And that's who I work for now. We're this tiny Denver based consulting firm. And what we've done for over 30 years is support small to medium sized businesses in cultural transformation and pieces of larger businesses in cultural transformation. Now, at a very practical level, what does that mean we do? We facilitate a lot of complex, often multi-day meetings with C team, senior team, strategy meeting, planning meeting, process redesign meeting, complex meetings. And then as part of those cultural interventions, we would always teach the change agents, the people doing Six Sigma or Agile, right? Or people who are project managers who have to facilitate a lot of complex meetings, this art of leadership. And the spark really was back on that procurement reengineering project, which went incredibly well, mostly because of the outside consultant, honestly, because I would have no idea. But I learned a ton, and it became my passion to both do culture change and facilitate complex collaborative meetings as part of those interventions.
I find that interesting. You said something a minute ago I want to come back to about asking leaders, did you say the effectiveness
Yeah.
of their
Average
meetings?
effectiveness of a typical meeting, 0 to
So
100.
how would you define the effectiveness of a meeting, or how would somebody score the effectiveness of their meeting? What sort of framework would you give them?
Well, it's interesting, right? Because the metaphor we use for a meeting or a project or leading a task force or leading a consulting engagement or even leading a process improvement initiative is the metaphor of a plane flight, right? I'm in Denver. You're where down in Salt Lake City. Is that right?
Yeah, Utah, Salt Lake.
Right. So if I were coming to visit you, Keith, right, three parts to that journey: takeoff, which last time I was out here at DIA, I time it every time. I think it was 42 seconds from the time they hit the jets to wheels up. If that does not go well, we're all dead, metaphorically. Same things on our process improvement initiative or consulting engagements or workshops or meetings. Now, the bulk of the time, I'm going to be in the air trying to get to Salt Lake airspace. The second place we get major plane crashes is on landing. Planes generally stay in the air. So coming back to the measurement, we teach many things, when we're helping people learn how to do this. But one of the simplest things is this, we call it the POPRA model. It's just an acronym. P stands for the purpose, the O stands for the objectives, the second P stands for the process, the R stands for the roles, and the A stands for the agreements. This all sounds so obvious, but so many people have meetings and they have no idea why we're having the meeting and what we're trying to get done. So there is no chance we will have an effective meeting if we don't know the destination and why we're flying to Salt Lake City. I'm going to end up down in Albuquerque, right? And if I don't know why we're doing things, what we're doing, there's no way I can design an agenda or the process for the meeting. There's no way I can think through the roles for who should be there, who shouldn't be there. And then the agreements are the interpersonal ways we interact. And so you can't measure the effectiveness of a meeting if you're not clear what you're doing. And so that's the first place to start. You shouldn't be allowed to have a meeting if you're not clear why and what you're doing. Otherwise, how would you even have a chance to measure it? But if you do know what that is, then you could say, did we get it done? Did we design the new process or not? Did that happen?
So much interesting stuff here. I feel like I can treat you like my meeting therapist today and ask you some questions because as a leader, this is something I'm always thinking about. Even internally, we've had some conversations about how to have good meetings because one of the questions is I guess I would describe this of being self-aware of, are you facilitating a bad meeting? Does the leader who's leading a bad meeting, do they know that they're leading a bad meeting?
Well, have you ever heard the agile term HIPPO, decision making? It's an acronym. It stands
Yeah.
right for the highest paid person's opinion. And we've all been in that meeting where the senior person, right, it could be a middle-aged white guy like me who thinks he's the smartest person on the call or in the room, scares everyone. He's very intimidating. He's a fiery red driving style. And he can be running an absolute plane crash of a meeting, but no one's going to tell him. And the real art of this style of leadership is knowing how to hold space so that that hippo, who may be the ultimate decision maker, which is that's the real world, right? Senior people are going to make decisions, gets the information that they need to make the right decision. So really what we're teaching people is the art of holding space so that it could very well be the most junior person. Maybe they're a person of color. Maybe they're, from Japan or some culture where saving face is important. Maybe they're an introvert, right? Speaking a second or third language. But if I, as a leader, don't know how to manage the hippo, right, and hold space for all voices, then I'm going to sub-optimize the caliber of the decision. And it is my job as a collaborative leader to know how to do that. Now, there's plenty of leaders. They don't realize that their meeting is a plane crash. They just don't get it because everyone's sitting there and not saying a word, just listening to what the leader thinks when he or she should be asking, what's the group think? And that is one of the most important questions when we're leading people is, what's the group think?
Evan, when you use the word meeting, it's a very broad word. Do you have a framework or kind of like a placeholder for different kinds of meetings that you could help us build some language around? What are some of the different kinds of meetings that will be referring to here today?
Well, we usually bucket them in three big types of meetings, right? One type of meeting is an informational meeting. It's a presentation. There is an expert presenting content at the group, right? Either a decision or technical information. It's a one-way meeting. Now, the second type of meeting is what we call a status update meeting, right? It could be the daily stand-ups, right? Or it could be the team meeting every week or bi-weekly. But generally, those meetings are still predominantly one way. There's a lot of presentations and updates, not a lot of conversation and collaboration. Now, the third type of meeting where we really focus are what we call a collaborative problem solving and decision making meeting. It's not present at people or update them. It's I've got to get a group of diverse stakeholders to come together, design a new process, right? Figure out what the strategy is, figure out how we're going to allocate scarce capital next year. We're making major decisions, articulating our vision, articulating what our strategy is, deciding what the KPIs are. And I've got to get them to get the best decision and get them to buy in. That type of meeting requires a lot of skill. Now, the status update type meetings, the stand-ups, those meetings are important. But we're really focusing on what I would say is not a course in meetings, but it's a course in leadership. It's change agent skills, consulting skills, continuous improvement skills, agile skills.
So it sounds like you've got this framework for different types of meetings, but it also sounds like there's some roles in the meeting. Maybe you could give us some language to think about the roles. You mentioned HIPPO, but what are some of the roles that you think of or train on relating to
Well, I mean, first of all, there's your role, right, as the leader of the meeting. Let me go on a little tangent here, right? There's many ways we could think about leadership. And one of the simplest ways, you and I can see all the books behind you. There's probably multiple leadership books back there, but one of the simplest ways to think about our leadership is on a continuum, where on one extreme, I could run the meeting where I'm the expert, right? I'm the expert in the process. I know everything about it. I'm the expert. Now, that's one extreme. Now, the other extreme where we're working is even though I have opinions on what the new process should look like, my job is to be an expert in process facilitation, how I get those 10 experts to design the right process. Now, it's a continuum. So we're in the middle of the world of that continuum. Now, there are advantages and disadvantages to working on the two sides of the continuum. If I'm the expert, I'm deciding for the group what the new process looks like. I'm telling them, look, I'm the expert. This is what it needs to be. Now, the advantage of deciding for the group and telling them the answer is a heck of a lot quicker. I didn't need to listen to the other 10 people, and I got my process, I got my way. Now, the disadvantage is I had 10 other smart people there who could have helped me make a better decision, but I never tapped their brains, which means I'm not going to make the best decision or design the best process, and I'm not going to get buy-in and ownership, so they're not going to implement. When I'm working on the neutral side, right? And what we mean by neutral, you're neutral on what the final process design looks like, but it all flips around. If we're good at this, and it's a big if, because people are never trained on the right side of the continuum, the neutral side of the continuum, we're going to help groups make better decisions, design the right process. We're going to get a ton more buy-in and ownership. Now, people say, Evan, there's a big disadvantage to asking people to engage. And I say, what's the disadvantage? And they say, it takes longer. And I say, yes, it looks that way in the beginning. Of course, to get 10 people to agree on anything is a minor leadership miracle. We're all dysfunctional human beings, right? But it doesn't take longer because you're solving root causes, not symptoms. It was the right decision, the right design of this new process from the get-go. So there's no rework cycles. It was the right decision. It sticks. And because the group owns it, it gets implemented. So it ends up going much faster, right? So we're really teaching people one mantra would be go slow to go fast, right? Now, the other disadvantage of engaging the group, it's so much harder than deciding and telling them. But that's the art. So the first role to your question is my role. The other big role is who gets to decide if we can't reach consensus. Now that could be the HIPPO. It could be the senior person, or it may be the subject matter. So I've got to define who the decision maker is. And then there's the roles of the experts in the group. There might be someone there who's a vendor, right? Whose their expertise is to help people understand the vendor side of things. We may have customers in there. And then we have tactical roles like timekeeper, scribe, tech facilitator. But the real role is me knowing as a leader how I show up, where I show up on that continuum. And always we encourage people to start from asking neutral, because often if we have the right experts with the right POPRA or purpose objectives, the right agenda or process, it's amazing what groups can figure out and do for themselves. And I think probably all of your process improvement people, that's their job, is to facilitate other experts to come up with the right answer. And they bring Six Sigma expertise or lean expertise.
Yeah, you're touching on something that I find so interesting. I think a lot of people's careers evolve and expand, you might say, based on being really good at something, becoming the expert. Like, maybe your first job is working in fast food and you're like, you show up on time and you do a good job. And so like, okay, you're the next manager. And all of a sudden you're moved into, you might say, up in your career. And now you go from being this person that's really good at something to, I think one thing that a lot of people think of, and this is something I've noticed with the mindset, like you reach a point where you're managing something that you know how to do versus managing something or having responsibility for something that you don't necessarily know how to do, like you're no longer the expert of. And I think that's where you're getting at this facilitation skill where I don't know how somebody would think about, I don't have to be the expert on this thing to be a facilitator of it. Is that kind of what you're getting at?
Absolutely, because your metaphor is perfect, right? I worked again in big pharma early in my career. So scientists come in if they're a biologist, they have biology expertise. If they're a chemist, they have chemistry expertise. And so often people got promoted, to your point, based on their technical expertise. I'm an incredible chemist. Now all of a sudden they find they have to lead other experts who have different expertise than they do, who may be closer to the works. By definition, when I'm put in more complex management roles, director roles, any sort of leadership role, I now go from being the expert type leader I was talking about to maybe not ever being neutral. That's the most artful style of leadership. But I certainly need to know how to ask people, pull in their thinking. Even if I'm the ultimate decision maker, I always want to hear the expertise that helps inform the best decision. So you really are always driven towards the neutral side to be a great leader. I want to start there and then only go and start saying, all right, I've heard everything. This is the decision. totally fine. But it's always the real art of working from ask before tell. Whereas an expert, I'm always working from tell because I'm the expert. Here's what we need to do.
So, as you're thinking about preparing for a meeting, are there some questions, or is there a framework? Is that a checklist that you might think of as you're like preparing for a particular meeting?
Well, that POPRA model is the five fundamental questions: why we're doing things, what we're trying to get done, how we're going to do it, right? That's the purpose, objectives, process. Who's going to do what to whom, right? What are the roles, which you asked earlier? And then the agreements are in what way do we need to interact? Now, there are a long list of checklists, like if I'm trying to prepare, do I have handouts and things like that? But at its most essence, the simplest level, I've got to be clear on those five questions, in particular the why and what. The honest truth is, I should not be allowed to hold a meeting if I can't answer why we're having the meeting and specifically what we're trying to get done, because I'll never design a good process if I don't know the destination. And I always tell people, don't go to people's meetings if they can't tell you why they're having the meeting, what they're trying to get done, show you an agenda and tell you their role there. Now, we get it. There's realpolitik. You have to go to your boss's meetings. But the discipline is never have a meeting if your POPRA, all right, this is the acronym we use, is not explicit. And I've got to figure that out ahead of time, often through talking to stakeholders. This is the change agent work, the consulting work before I ever get to a high stakes meeting, right? To just figure out why the client wants to do things, what they're trying to get done, socializing that before I ever get to the meeting. Then on takeoff, right, that first part of the meeting, it's my job to now get the group clear on that POPRA before I let them fly the plane. In so many meetings, we just start discussing things with no framing around it. And that's where we get all these horrible meetings, is because people have, if you don't know what you're doing, you're going to be bouncing off other people's agendas for your meeting.
This episode is brought to you by KPI Fire. Are you struggling to ignite real change in your continuous improvement program? Firestarter is your field guide. Real stories, proven strategies, no fluff. Get it now on Amazon. Evan, could you just explain that Popper model again for us with what that stands for?
Yeah, so it's an acronym, right? The P, there's the first letter in the acronym, stands for the purpose and all the context around it. So let's say I was running a task force trying to improve morale. The purpose of that task force was to improve morale in the organization. Now, there's a lot of context around it, right? Who's the sponsor, right? There may be pre work data. When are we presenting out to the sponsor? How many meetings are going to need between now and when we present? So there's all this context. Why was I chosen? That's the first P. The O is the objective for the meeting. Now, maybe the objective for the meeting is to identify the root causes that are getting in the way of morale in our organization. That's the hard objective. Now, you could call that a goal, a deliverable, an outcome, makes no difference. We use objective, but it's the same thing. The second P in the Popper model is the process. Now, at the meeting level, the process is the agenda. That's the high level flight plan. Now, inside a meeting, there's all smaller processes, things like fishbone diagramming or force field analysis or SIPOC or all the tools they'll use. So there's more detailed process. But at the meeting level, it's the agenda. Now, the R are the roles and responsibilities in the meetings, the things we talked about earlier. My role as the leader. Who's the decision maker? Who's the timekeeper? Who's the scribe? What's the subject matter expert's role? And the A are the agreements. How do we need to interact in a way that allows us to be functional? Things like no multitasking. If we can't reach consensus, what are we going to do? Oh, we're going to turn to the HIPPO, let the HIPPO decide. Or maybe I'm going to decide for the group as the leader, right? The sort of housekeeping, some people call them meeting norms, ground rules. That's what the agreements are. And so those are the five pieces of the Popper model: purpose, objectives, process, roles, and agreements.
Got it. Okay. I love it. That's a great POPRA. Excellent. Well, I want to drill in a little bit on a couple of the roles there. We talked a little bit about this, but like timekeeper. So, hey, we've got 15 minutes for this meeting. We've got 60 minutes for this meeting. I think what you're saying is the timekeeper is the person who can let us know when we're out of time or
Yeah.
off schedule.
Yeah, well, here's a tip for your listeners because look, we used to train people how to facilitate face to face, where we'd be in a meeting room for 2 days, 3 days, half day, right? We'd be working on flip charts, we'd be working on the walls, mapping out processes, things your people probably still do. Now, the world changed over time because I go back far enough where Merck had no problem flying 50 executives into Paris, spending thousands upon thousands of dollars on meetings, a 3 day meeting, right? But as WebEx and live meeting and go-to meetings came along, and now, of course, we use Microsoft Teams video and or Zoom or Google Meets, those platforms came along. Clients over time started saying, Evan, we're not meeting in a room all the time. We're meeting virtually, right? And so the one role I would say virtually that is so important is to have a second tech facilitator who is both managing the tech issues that come up, but they also are your timekeeper. They can scribe for you. It is a two-person job in a high stakes, certainly virtual event
Mhm.
to run a meeting. So as the leader, it's hard enough to deal with the dysfunction of a group. And we're all dysfunctional, as I said. So I want to offload that. Now, the tip for your listeners when we're working virtually, use the timer. Every time you start a new agenda item, time box it. Have that clicking down because people are unbelievably bad at staying on time. But when they start seeing, oh my goodness, I have 2 minutes to get through this presentation, I've got to, it's harder to do in a room together.
Yeah.
My timekeeper in a room, they need to cut everything off. But when everyone starts seeing, all right, you got 12 minutes to present, and the working agreement, especially these are status update meetings where it's a lot of presentations and updates. The working agreement is when you hit the 3 minute mark, it's over. We're going to close and land that meeting, the mini meeting, because every agenda item
Hmm.
in a status update meeting is actually its own meeting, right? So if I have 7 agenda items, I'm actually running 7 separate meetings. And so timing is easier virtually because just get the discipline of watch the clock. You're not going over, and we're leaving time to capture next steps. And then we're going to go to agenda item 2 and we're going to do it all over again.
So I like this thing that the idea that a facilitator might be a different person than the leader. Let's say, I'm the department leader. I'm having a meeting with my team. I think what you're saying is it's okay to have a different facilitator than the person leading the meeting, and that might actually be a good thing.
It depends how invested the leader is. Now, most senior people have never been trained in this. They're trained how to present, and that's an important communication skill. That's the other side of the continuum. But we're teaching what we call collaborative leaders. So, as a leader, I need to know how to do this, but it does require art. Now, if I'm so invested in what the final design of the process is, I'm not going to be facilitating. I'm going to be telling and pretending I'm facilitating. So in those cases, we would say, let the leader, who may be the ultimate decision maker, be a participant and have a second person who's facilitating. Now, there is a tech facilitator, especially virtually, that is different from the facilitator of the meeting itself, right? Because it is hard enough to try to manage the group dynamic. I don't want to be monitoring the chat and paying attention to that. My tech facilitator can help me out. Hey, there's a question in there. So it really is a two-person job, especially virtually, to run a facilitated meeting. A good leader, though, that hippo, if they're good at this, they know how to ask questions and only offer their opinions and expertise because the group doesn't have it, and or the group's about to make a terrible decision that they know they can't sell upstairs. And if they let the group make that decision, they're going to be laughed out of the room. The C team's going to laugh them out of the room. But that's what we're trying to teach anyone, this art of leadership. And it is leadership, not meetings we're teaching them. And so that's, what we're trying to do. But it is a two-person job to run a facilitated virtual meeting for sure.
Interesting. Are some of these rules that you talk about with meetings, do they change based on how many people are in the meeting?
Well, the design changes. Now, first off, and I'm sure you've experienced this, we often have too many people in the meeting, right? There's just too many people, especially in the status update meetings, right? I ask people all the time, what's a typical number of people in your meetings? And they say 25 people. You can't facilitate 25 people. And in a status update meeting with 7 agenda items, most of the time, For agenda item 1, it may be 5 or 6 out of the 25 people who are relevant. For agenda item 2, right, it could be a different 6 or 7 people. And so what we try to teach people to do is isolate. We've all done RACI, right? Or who's responsible, accountable, consulted, informed. Who are the people on the agenda item who are an R, A, or C? They need to weigh in. The other people, the other 12, 13 people, they're just there to be informed. And so another discipline is knowing how to bring in the right people at the right time. Now, if it's 25 people, to your question, I have to use breakouts. I can't have a conversation with 25 people. And now you're getting into the more detailed design, right? If I'm running some sort of Kaizen event with a ton of people, I'm going to have to do a lot of work at the breakout level, maybe give each breakout a different part of the process. And then I bring the group of 25 back together to do the synthesis, but you're now getting into the nuances of design. But most of the time we have too many people there because people, what's the acronym? FOMO, fear of missing out. Everyone wants to be at the meeting because they're afraid if I'm not there, I'm not going to be able to influence it. And the truth is, if you're good at this, you only invite the people who really need to be there. And that is based on the purpose and objectives.
So in terms of, I mean, I think it's really interesting, and this is probably where we, get some clients and stuff like handling a basic meeting. There's probably like basic meeting 101, but then you're getting into like large group meetings and handling breakouts. I'm thinking of even just how to facilitate the technical part of breakouts in Microsoft Teams. You gotta learn that skill for sure, just technically, let alone the facilitator part. Let's talk about some pretty typical meeting structures, like a daily stand up. This is something that's a common pattern, exists across a bunch of different industries. What does a good daily stand-up look like when you apply, you know?
Well, where the POPRA model matters in that type of meeting is at the agenda item level, because if they're meeting on a regular basis, they know why we're running the meetings. What we have a general sense of the purpose, the bigger context. Now, what can change are the agenda items. So where the POPRA model fits structurally is that, coming back to that, treat every agenda item as its own meeting, is you've got to frame the takeoff for every agenda item the same way. I've got to tell the group, here's why we're talking about this. Let me give you some context, right? Here's what we're trying to get done. Now, in those meetings, I have a client, large pharma client, they use, I think it's DIA, right? Decide, inform, make people aware. Or no, the second one is input. The third thing is make people aware. The awareness topic, there's no conversation. The decide or get input, there is conversation. So I got to tell the group, look, this is a decision-making topic, and our decision is to decide what vendor we're going to select, right? Now I have to design a process, and we teach people using things like Mural, whiteboard, spreadsheets, because I need some sort of platform to design things. And if we were working in a room, we're going to be doing process mapping on the wall, but I can do all those things in whiteboards as well. So I have to have thought about the process just for that agenda item. And the roles can change for that agenda item. I could have a different decision maker for agenda item 1 from agenda item 2, right? And if it's only input, then I'm not making a decision, but I have to have a process, but I got to get the roles clear. And sometimes there's mini agreements at every agenda item. For example, that agreement is when we hit the 3-minute remaining mark, we're stopping the conversation on this agenda item. We're capturing next steps. We're moving on. And so in those stand-up meetings, which are going to be a lot of awareness topics often, just treat those meetings like a series of mini meetings. And the POPRA model applies at the agenda item level because they know the bigger POPRA for the project itself or the initiative itself.
Very interesting. I'm curious to drill into some of these agreements, because this to me sounds like where somebody who's designing some meeting structure has some decisions to make. Like, I guess I'm probably reading into this idea of agreements a little bit, but you said something like, is multitasking allowed, yes or no, in this meeting, or encouraged?
Well, I don't think it should be encouraged. It does happen. Now, here's the thing. In those meetings, let's say, 25 people or 14 people, and 7 agenda items, 3 are relevant to me. There's only 3 where I'm either responsible, accountable, or consulted. I have no problem if I'm in the informed capacity letting people multitask then. because they're going to multitask. Because if this first agenda item has nothing to do with me, why am I even paying attention to it? I'm sitting there going, why do I even have to endure this? So, but for the people who are responsible, accountable, and being consulted, they can't multitask. Now, these are norms. One of the reasons people do so much multitasking is the meetings are so bad that they have better things to do, including holding another meeting in their office while they're dialing into that meeting, from headquarters. Because if it has nothing to do with me, why am I paying attention? And so I want to be very pragmatic with the agreements. There's agreements on time. There's agreements that when I'm responsible, accountable, or consulted for agenda item, I'm going to turn my video on, and I have to have video on. The other people don't have to have the video on. And so it's just being very disciplined about who really needs to engage in this agenda item based on the purpose and objective, which is often very fuzzy, and treating all those meetings as a chain of mini meetings. 7 agenda items, it's actually 7 mini meetings.
Interesting. Video on, video off, I think, is an interesting one. I've sat in meetings with companies where it seems like the culture is nobody turns their camera on. And then I've sat in meetings where, cameras are on. And, I definitely am a fan of being able to see somebody's face in a meeting when you have a conversation about something to tell if it's being received or not. It's an
I
interesting.
think it's essential. And when people cameras are off, they're multitasking. That's why they want the cameras off. So having the agreement of cameras on. But again, I want to be pragmatic. Cameras on for the people who need to be engaged in this agenda item discussion, right? Because it's exhausting to have your camera on if it has nothing to do with me, right? But you should always have people's cameras on, especially if I'm doing collaborative problem solving, right? Because we've already on these screens lost so much human dynamic. Like, I don't know anything. I can't see any nervous twitches below your clavicle, right? Or wherever you are here. We've already lost so much information. To let people turn their videos on or off, everything slows down, right? Everything slows down, and people have to stay engaged when the videos are on. Whereas when they're off, they are multitasking. It's just, why wouldn't they be?
Yeah, that's very interesting. What are your thoughts on like reoccurring structured meetings versus, somebody throws something on the calendar, one-off sort of meetings? Like maybe the idea of tiered meetings. Tiered meetings is kind of like a structure where you have like a specific reoccurring meetings that exist for a specific purpose. Thoughts on
Yeah.
that topic?
Well, yeah, you have your daily stand-ups often if you're doing things like agile, right? Then you have, sort of your what do they call the after action review types meetings. I have the sprint meetings. The meetings we're really focusing on are the collaborative meetings, right? The planning meetings, the strategy meetings. Right? And those type of meetings, they are sacred because that's where decisions ultimately are made. I don't know if you've ever read, I can't see behind you there, Patrick Lencioni's The Five Dysfunctions of Teams, right? There's his first book was Death by Meeting, and there's a great quote in there. And what he says is that when we run bad meetings, it almost always leads to bad decisions, which is a recipe for mediocrity. It's a recipe for performance mediocrity. It's a recipe for morale cratering in an organization because I have to sit in all these awful meetings. It's a recipe for productivity loss. And most importantly, it's a recipe for something else. If I'm the leader running these 50%, 60%, even 70% is awful. It's a C minus effective meetings, right? It's a recipe for people seeing me as a bad leader because people, they do not hate meetings. What they hate is wasting time. And so many meetings are a waste of time. Now, when we did culture change, the easy thing with the C team, right? Because I go back far enough to where, I was trained by Michael Hammer in re-engineering, and Jack Welch was the CEO of GE. They were doing workout, which that was sort of lean type stuff. They didn't call it that back then. But the first thing you do with a C team is help them rip out the bureaucracy and the simple things to focus on: unnecessary approvals, unnecessary reports, right? We have unnecessary policies, and then we have unnecessary meetings. Now, the meetings we're focusing on are incredibly necessary. And if I connect this back to culture, right, this is why we would always work at the meeting level, because it is the fundamental productivity loss of the organization. It's also where our values either show up or don't show up. Everyone's got a value like teamwork or collaboration. Yeah, let's go watch your meeting and see whether you really value that.
Mhm.
And so if we change the leadership of the high stakes workshop meetings, we begin changing the culture of the organization at the root cause, because we're going to spend years of our lives in meetings, like it or not. We can't be wasting time. So that really is the area where it's the quickest intervention into changing the culture. And so that's why we always focused there when we were doing big cultural interventions, because that's where our leadership, as we said earlier, manifests.
So if I'm the leader of the meeting and I decide that I've got a problem and I want to change it, that's probably relatively straightforward. One thing that might be harder for somebody is, let's say you're a participant inside of a meeting and you think that there's some struggles. Is there advice that you could give anyone on how to respectfully ask for improvements in the meetings? Any coaching that you could give folks who are in those meetings?
Yeah, I mean, there's 5 core things we're teaching. That first one is the POPRA model, right? The second thing we're teaching them is the art of handling challenging people, how to deal with interventions with disruptive people. That is the art of facilitation. The third thing is this art of holding space, some basic tools and techniques so everyone gets to engage. Now, the fourth thing to your question is how we land the plane. Now, first off, a lot of times we don't leave time to land, so people drop out of the call. It's very fuzzy. What do we agree on? Where do we go from here? What are the next steps? Who's responsible? But as part of, and this is just a basic continuous improvement thing at the meeting level, one thing we always ask people to do is take some time with the group and make them have a conversation on what's working well and what needs to get better for the next meeting. Okay, because you want the group engaging in that dialogue, because it is the discipline of continuous improvement at the meeting level. Now, you're also possibly teasing at the place where it's the hippo, possibly, who's not very good at this running the meeting, and no one wants to tell the hippo, the emperor has no clothes. Part of this is the good consulting. When one of the things we say to people is, look, go, one of the simplest interventions to deal with meeting effectiveness, go do an anonymous survey. Right, whatever you use, Zoomerang or Survey Monkey, everyone's got their own, survey. You've got to get permission from the hippo, though. Now, this is where, when we were consultants, usually if you want to change in an organization, it starts with the CEO and their team, because an organization only can change as much as that senior leader can change. But let's bring this down to, lower level. It's a task force or an initiative you're leading. The leader of that initiative is the one who you're only going to go as far as they can change. So you've got to get their permission to do this, right? Because it's delicate. Now I'm going to go off, do the survey, and then I'm going to come back to the leader and say, let's take a look at this. No names, totally anonymous. What do you think needs to change based on this? Now, the questions I would ask the group is, what's working? Very simple questions. And what's getting in the way of us being more effective? And by putting that data in front of the senior leader, gives them the opportunity to, first of all, they're often blind to this, right? They just don't realize no one's telling them the truth. So it gets the honest information in front of them and allows them to make choices. Now, this may be a place where I may say to the leader, would it be helpful to you if I ran the meeting and you were a participant, right? But that's really the first thing I've got to do, is get the leader to start understanding that the dynamic in the meeting is having a material impact on the caliber of the decisions we're making. And some leaders are just not very aware.
It sounds like that could be maybe there's a suggestion in there, like if you're somebody who's leading a meeting, ask somebody else to lead the meeting so that you can observe the meeting versus lead the meeting. Because the perspective that you have is different based on the chair you're sitting in, you might say.
And I can save, so to speak, if I think about, I have so many bullets to fire. If I'm running the meeting, I'm in talking mode the whole time. When I'm a participant, I can watch, see what people are saying, and only talk when I have to, because the group needs the information. So it allows me to be in a place where I can guide the discussion, right? Rather than have to carry it. Now, you want to be good at this. If you're the leader, you do want to be a good collaborative leader, understand this. But again, if you're so vested in the outcome of what the new design of the process is, you're not going to be facilitating. And everyone knows that. It's the illusion of facilitation, but the decision was already made by you before the meeting, and now you're pretending you're having a facilitated meeting to make a decision that's already been made. And people are smart. So what we tell them is, look, if you want to make a decision, just tell the group, this is the decision I made. Now, what you've traded off is, did you make the best decision? Because you didn't ask anyone what they thought, right? And you're not going to get any buy-in when you decide for the group. And so that's, the real art of, in many ways, these are coaching skills, right? Because we can think about, as a manager, right? I have a coaching role. My people come to me and say, Evan, what should I do? I can tell them, go do this, go do this, go do this, and they'll go do it. I have power and authority. But the more artful thing coaching is to ask them, so let's back up here. Why are you doing this? What are you trying to get done? What are your strategies or processes you're thinking about? What role do I need to play as we deal with this? What role? So that POPRA model applies at a coaching level, because good coaches ask a lot of questions. Because if I tell my people what to do, they'll go do it, but they're not learning to figure it out themselves. So they're constantly coming back to me and being like, Evan, what do I do next? Like, you should know what to do next, but I haven't trained them in the fundamentals that are going to allow them to go fish for themselves, so to speak.
I'm curious with 2020 COVID, a lot of things changed, a lot of stuff that was happening in person became remote. Are some of these skills with meetings things that specifically apply to remote meetings more so than in person?
What we're doing, I mean, for 25 years, all we did was train people how to do in-person facilitation, right? We ran a 3-day program. It's all practice, coaching, feedback, very small group, 12 people, 2 instructors. That's what we did for decades, right? Now, the principles are exactly the same virtually, right? I still have groups of people. I still have why we're doing things, what we're doing. The tools are different, right? We're using things like Mural or Miro or Lucid Spark or whatever whiteboard platform, or maybe we're just using a simple spreadsheet to capture information. But the principles of facilitation are independent of the platform. Face to face, virtual, Miro makes no difference. And so, one thing I always like to, when I do these podcasts, is just give a simple tip that can only be done virtual. People, there's something we call a simultaneous chat. It sounds so obvious, right? And I've run the program, trained thousands of people virtually, right? One of the things you say is, stop using the chat the way you would let a group engage in a room where people just chime in the chat. Because it's always the same 3 out of the 12 people who are doing 80, 90% of the chatting. Simultaneous chat is, we pose a question to the group. Right? Maybe the question is, what do you think the most important bottlenecks are to address in the current state process? But instead of letting them answer in the chat immediately, we say, prepare your answer in the chat and wait until everyone's hand raised reaction emoji is up. You're not allowed to submit. Now, it does 2 things. One, it slows things down for the junior people who are less likely to talk, the introverts who are less likely to talk, the people speaking in a second or third language, the junior people. Because they've had time to think, they need to put something in there. Because all of a sudden the tension is, whoa, I got to actually engage. Yeah, you got to engage. The hand raise reaction emoji starts cueing, you got to get this moving. And then we put a little banner in there that would say something like, what are the major bottlenecks? And they have to hit enter or submit immediately at the same time. All of a sudden we're hearing
Oh,
from
I
those
like that.
junior people, the people who wouldn't talk. And it allows the hippo to all of a sudden get information. They're like, wait a minute, Sally, what do you mean by what you have in there? And this simple simultaneous chat can only be done virtually. And it is such a simple
Yeah.
tool that anyone can do to hold space for those voices that are never going to say a word, but have exactly the expertise to help the senior person, the hippo, make the right decision. Just go use simultaneous chat over and over. It will change the dynamic of your meetings. That simple tool.
I like that. And what I'm hearing is that there's a little trick in there about not just ask everybody to post a response, but ask them to write the response and then don't press send until and you do it at the same time so that you're not having, oh, well, I saw the boss say this, so I'm going to say the same thing. I like
Yeah,
that.
it avoids groupthink
Yeah.
and it holds space for the voices less likely to engage. And it just helps make sure we're having a richer conversation rather than letting, the extroverts carry the conversation. And jokingly, we often say, look, introverts, they need time to think before they speak. Extroverts sometimes should take time to think before they speak. And what simultaneous chat does, it just balances the playing field so that we're hearing from everyone, not just the extrovert.
Yeah, I like that. That's a good little trick. Let me ask you a couple of specifics. And again, maybe this is part of like what you'd call the agreements of a meeting. We have some meetings, I'd call them like status update meetings where everybody comes with, and we use a little tool called Stand Up Alice that asks some questions. And so people like put their answers in before the meeting, and then we come to the meeting, and some of it is just like read through. I've heard some people say things like, don't do status update meetings where people have to come and read the updates. And, I'm kind of curious what your thoughts are on like read the stuff before the meeting or just make enough time for the meeting to allow people to read. Do you have any best
Yeah.
practices on that topic?
Well, again, that could be cultural, right? If you're going to do pre work, people should do the pre work, right? They should submit it. And if they're not doing it, that's why I do the process checks at the meeting to call people on not doing the pre work. Now, people are busy, right? Some people do the pre work, some don't. Another choice is just leaving a little time in the meeting to just let people read and process the pre work, add to it, because that becomes context for the rest of the meeting. Now, Amazon has a very interesting culture around meetings. I've trained a few people from Amazon. They call it a narrative, where literally you go in and everyone reads the narrative and they spend some time reading it before they even engage in the conversation. So it is cultural, but leveraging pre-work is important, right? Because I want to get things done so that whatever time I have in the meeting is really the value add conversation. But pragmatically, if people aren't doing the pre work, your first agenda item might be 5 minutes. All right, read the pre work and process it to figure out this question, right? Whatever it is. So I think that's just a choice. And often that's based on the culture of an organization.
Yeah, I like that. In terms of like different types of meetings, this, again, this is just something that I've participated in, but we have some meetings that we'll call a working session where it's just, sort of like one of the things that's a problem with remote work is you kind of don't necessarily know like when that person working 5 or 8 time zones away is at their computer to collaborate. So we'll have these like times where there's this dedicated block where someone's going to be available. It's kind of like you can holler at someone across the office and you know that they're going to be there. Curious what kind of meeting you would call that.
Well, I mean, people can work now asynchronously, right? On a global team, people in India are upside down from the people in North America, right? And Europe's, 5 or 6 hours ahead of us. Pacific Rim, I run programs through in the Pacific Rim, which in some ways is easier to run programs because I can start them at 5 at night and end them at 1 in the morning. But I have to be pragmatic on global teams, and my meetings probably need to be shorter given the and then asynchronously I may have meetings happening in those regions and have to have a way then to process that across the globe. But it's a challenge, and it does take time to run a good meeting, and often we're not realistic about time. And if we're doing a working session meeting where I have a real conversation that's needed, if I want to get the right decision, I have to leave enough time to hear from the voices. And the more people, the longer the meeting's going to be. A meeting with 15 people is going to take longer than a meeting with 5 people because I've got more to socialize. But I think you're now thinking about the pragmatics of working on global teams where often we're going to run meetings and some of the work is asynchronous, happening overnight when others are sleeping. And then I have to have some dedicated time where people are together to figure out, okay, we've done the work here, here, and here. What does that mean globally?
I want to run through what I call the rapid fire. These are just some kind of quick, short answer type questions here. So the most important job of a leader is to blank.
Most important job of a leader is to elicit the best thinking from the group so they make the best decision.
Do you have a favorite go-to problem-solving tool for facilitating meetings?
Well, I mean, we think about the world problem solving as two funnels, right? And so the tool is very simple. It's open, narrow, close, right? First funnel, open things up, hear from everyone. Let's get, everything on the table. Then we got to narrow, right? And we use tools and techniques to narrow whatever they are. And then we got to close, land to get to the root cause. Now I've got a second funnel. It's another open, narrow, close. Let's hear from everyone. What are all the solutions to address this root cause? Now let's do analysis, narrow down, and now we need to close. Now, the hard part in a facilitated meeting is knowing how to land and close because the tools we use, whatever they are, right? Force field analysis, 2x2 matrix, fishbone diagram. I mean, they go on and on. There's so many tools in the world. They ensure we have space to hear from everyone. They narrow things down, but when they target the right conversation. But what we're really teaching people is the art of what do you do after you've run the tool? How do you get the group to agree? And so, but just to your question, there's no real problem solving other than us two funnels, open, narrow, close, open, narrow, close.
Now, you used an analogy of like a plane flying for having a meeting. Explain that analogy to us just a little bit.
Well, I mean, the analogy is takeoff is everything. If it doesn't go well, we're dead on, takeoff. And so, but the middle part of the meeting is where the art of facilitation is. This is where we have to have the right tools and techniques, know how to handle the hippos, manage the hippos, know how to take them through whatever SIPOC or whatever we're doing with the group. That's where we're going to spend the time. And the third part of the metaphor is you've got to land well, or you're going to have another plane crash at the project level. And so it's just the simplicity of take off well. If you do, you're going to have less turbulence when you fly and bring it in for a landing because most meetings, they just don't land well. And now we have to have another meeting, right? Because we didn't land well. So it's just that simple metaphor. And I could apply it to projects, task forces, consulting engagements, process improvement initiatives. It's just, there's always three parts: take off, flying, and land.
That's a very good, very useful analogy. Do you have a favorite question?
I think the favorite question always is going to be, why are we doing this? I mean, who was it? Simon Sinek is like, you have to ask why. I mean, that is the fundamental question, is why are we doing this? Right. And if I don't know why we're doing things, then I can't answer what we're doing until I know why. And those two questions together, why and what, they're everything. Well, you work for Covey, right? What do you always say? Begin with the end in mind, right? I mean, that really is, what are we trying to get done? Why are we doing things? What are we trying to do? And that is beginning with the end in mind. I can't design anything if I don't know those two questions.
So true. We got to get clear on what we want. Finish this sentence for me. A great meeting is.
A great meeting is something where we make the best decision and people feel like it was value added use of time, not a waste of time.
A lot of things have changed over the last number of years, particularly with COVID and remote meetings, and now AI is like upon us. Do you have any predictions about how AI might be changing meetings in the future?
I mean, I'm pretty far out of my swim lane here, but yes, I think there's always going to be a place for human beings in meetings, right? Because a lot of our decisions are made based on values, political realities. What I think and we all now have Copilot, all these AIs. Do we need administrative assistance? No. Now we have no idea what the AIs are writing down, right? We got to, at the end of the meeting, we got to come back and say, are those the next steps? Did the AI capture it? But where I think AI is going to displace certain human things is in the analytics side, instantly doing scenario planning. So I think there is always going to be a place for facilitation in a meeting. But the AIs are going to do a lot of the business intelligence decision making. And, I don't go me down the road with AI because I'm no expert, but, it is clearly going to displace a lot of things human beings do today. But they're still going to need someone to meet, but maybe not. I mean, I had a guy come observe our program. He was trying to build a business on having AIs run and facilitate the whole meeting. I saw what he was doing. I was like, I don't think it's going to work. Knock yourself out. I don't know what your run rate is on venture capital, but I haven't checked, but I haven't seen anything come out of what he was doing. So I think there will always be a human being, but clearly the AIs are going to take over the business analytics side of things. It's just they're going to be able to do things that we might have paid McKinsey or Bain to go off and do things. Now the question is, why do I need to pay those consultants? They're probably using AI to
Yeah.
do what
Yep.
they're coming back to me with. I think the business analytics side of things, that's where the AI is going to have a big impact on meeting.
Yeah, I think that's interesting. The AI definitely can generate a lot of insights, but I think that's where being a good meeting facilitator, you probably are better at picking up on some of those insights. So if you have a tool that can help you at least be aware of some of those insights, I think you still have a choice to like act on those. Human in the loop, I think, is how it's referred to.
Yeah. I mean, look, human beings still are going to make choices. And so the AIs are going to help us hopefully make better choices, make better decisions, because they're going to be able to process things that, we wouldn't be, it would take us a long time to do. And so it'll be interesting to see where that all goes. I'm 61, so I hope it doesn't go there too fast. And I'm not displaced, but I'm pretty confident for the next 5 years, we're going to still need people who are facilitative or collaborative leaders.
Well, I do think there's a lot of change that is going to be required, and there's a lot of facilitation with humans to to be the ones to say yes to that change that the AI is going to be able to present. It's going to be a lot of humans that need to get on board with all these decisions. So I think that the skill set that you provide is very relevant and very applicable to a whole lot of people. Evan, you've shared some really great stuff. We've had some really great conversations. For anybody that wants to follow up or maybe learn more a little bit about you and your company, how might we follow up with you?
Yeah, probably the easiest thing is to go look up Evan Unger on LinkedIn. There's actually surprisingly 6 Evan Ungers. I'll be the one with the little goofy grin and a blue checked shirt there. The name of the company, Schwartz and Associates. You can get to my website there. And look, we run this program. Primarily, we like to do it with everyone doing Six Sigma in an organization. I, train entire people doing Kaizen for an organization because we want to change the culture of that. But we do run it as an open enrollment program for marketing purposes. So if one of your listeners is curious, they reach out to me. If they're from a client we never work with, I'll knock a ton of money off because I know all when people take it, they're going to love the program. So if they want to get an unbelievable value meal, they can reach out to me and take the program because I have full confidence they're going to go back to their leader and say, all our lean people or all our Six Sigma people or all our agile people or project managers need to take this because it is the 101 of knowing how to lead change and transformation.
Yeah, well, we're definitely huge fans and advocates of structured problem solving and continuous improvement and having those frameworks in place and having those training systems in place, whether it's a formal green belt program, whether it's meeting facilitation. These are the skills that an organization can teach and train to make sure that they are continuously improving. And so we really appreciate your wisdom that you shared with us today. We're happy to have you join us. And yeah, thanks so much for being here with us today, Evan.
Keith, thank you. It's been my pleasure. I really appreciate it. And best wishes to you. Happy New Year.
You bet. You bet. For our listeners, if you'd like to ask a question to Evan, you can find him there on LinkedIn or check the show notes. You can find me on LinkedIn also, Keith Norris. And this concludes this episode of KPI Fireside, a continuous improvement podcast. If you've enjoyed the episode, please be sure to add a comment. I guess I could say if you haven't enjoyed the episode, feel free to add a comment there too. I'd be happy to respond. You can like, follow, subscribe on all the socials. You can share the podcast with friends or colleagues who are as passionate about continuous improvement as you are. You can find us wherever you get your podcasts. And until next time, keep driving progress and sparking change.